Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Hey, welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. Good to have you with us today. As Prime Minister Carney and President Trump meet in Washington and start talking about trade issues and tariffs and a number of very key issues that are going to have a dramatic impact on both countries. They already are having a dramatic impact. The misinformation that seems to surround this whole thing is mind-boggling, quite frankly. And I've had a few of you respond through your reactions to some of the podcasts in the past about some of the stuff that Trump is saying these days. And if there's some foundation for some of this stuff, that we really are ripping off the United States. The short answer is no, we're not. And the more frustrating part to that short answer is most Americans and most American politicians know that, yet they let Trump get away with the rhetoric. You know, the idea that the United States is subsidizing Canada by $250 billion annually is simply not true. There are no numbers to validate that, which is not surprising. I mean, we've seen Trump do that in the past. He simply pulls numbers out of the air. Mind you, there are other phrases we could use there, and states them as fact, and people just buy into it, say, well, that's Trump, so he must be telling the truth. But he's not. There's absolutely no validity to this. Also, of course, with the statement by Trump that, look, we don't need Canada, we don't need the lumber, we don't need their steel, we don't need their aluminum, we don't need, and on it goes, as if to say that they can be and will be and already are self-sufficient totally. Well, that's not true either. The problem is we Canadians, and I don't know why, maybe it's just because we're kind of, holding a hand saying, well, we're just doing our thing here. We don't beat our own drum enough about what we do here and what we supply and the impact that our economy is having on the United States. It usually is the reverse. And I understand that. They're the big bear and we're just the little guy, the neighbor to the north. But we do have a dramatic impact on the U.S. economy in so many different ways. But we haven't done a very good job of promoting that. And as I say, beating our own drum about that. Part of the problem, of course, is when Justin Trudeau was the prime minister here, I don't know that the Trudeau actually ever had a grasp of economics and the impact that it had. He just seemed to be interested in other stuff for some reason, and that was to our detriment. But anyway, he's gone. He's moved on. And now we've got a prime minister who gets it and understands just what we are doing, the impact that what we're doing is having on the U.S. economy, too. I don't know if we're going to be able to penetrate that brain of such as it is of Donald Trump's to get that message across. But the facts are the facts here, too. And I know that the Canadian officials have actually put some numbers together to try to indicate that. For instance, when it comes to energy, and Trump saying that, well, we don't need their crude oil. We don't. Yeah, they do. They do. Canada provides more crude oil to the United States than Mexico, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq combined. Let me repeat that. Canada supplies more crude to the United States than Mexico, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq combined. They darn well do need our crude. They absolutely do. And, of course, when Trump puts a tariff on this, thinking that he's punishing us, he's punishing American consumers. Because that's going to jack the price of gasoline up in the United States by, well, they figure 25 to 75 cents per gallon. And that's crippling. But it's imposed by the White House. It's not imposed by us. This is why Canada and the U.S. have entered into free trade agreements over the last little while, because we understand that there's a commonality here and there's a reliance on each other's product, and let's get a deal for the consumers here. It's a common sense thing to do. Trump just wants to rip those things up. He's got this mindset that the Americans are so self-sufficient, we don't need the rest of the world for anything at all. They can make it there. If they need more cars, they'll make more cars. If they need aluminum, they'll get their own aluminum. And it's just not the case at all. And the other element, too, is he just seems to think that, he can just flick a switch all of a sudden and they can become totally self-reliant. That doesn't happen either. It takes years and years to build factories and to mine minerals that aren't being mined or not mined sufficiently enough, or there may not just be enough of them in the United States right now. And these are the realities that Americans, I think, need to be told about. 71% of U.S. imports of potash, which, of course, is a crucial fertilizer for American farmers, comes from Canada. 71%. 50% of America's imports of refined zinc comes from Canada. 23% of all aluminum comes from Canada. 21% of all U.S. imports of uranium comes from Canada. So Trump, yes, you do need Canada. Yes, you do need the resources that we bring to the table during these trade discussions. And that's not going to go away. And now individual states seem to understand that. And we talked about that during the first round of negotiations under the first Trump administration. There are a number of U.S. states that are totally dependent upon Canada. Canada, the top supplier of merchandise imports for 22 U.S. states. 22. 98% of its imports are coming from Canada for those states. Montana is the most exposed, of course, followed by Vermont, North Dakota, and on it goes down the list. But there is an interrelationship between those economies. And that's why, for instance, our retaliatory tariffs that Prime Minister Carney has put in place are directed at that level because it's going to have a negative impact. You know, the most obvious one that came to mind, and I guess it's there again, is Tennessee whiskey. And it's having a huge impact on Americans because they're producing all this stuff and there's no market for it. You know, they're making more and more and more of this stuff. They counted on the fact that, for instance, here in Ontario, the LCBO is going to buy a big chunk of that, bring it up here, sell it, and everybody was going to live happily ever after. Well, the LCBO is not importing American whiskey anymore. So that stuff's sitting there and there's nobody to buy it. And that's going to have a negative impact on their economy. But Trump either doesn't get it or just doesn't give a damn because he seems to be wanting to try to make a point. For a guy who's supposed to be, the king of the art of the deal and this fabulous negotiator, he really doesn't seem to understand economics. And it's having a traumatic effect on the U.S. economy, let alone on the Canadian economy. Now, I don't think, nor should the Prime Minister try to school Trump on this. He's surrounded by people that I think get it, although you have to wonder sometimes. It's the question that we always seem to ask ourselves around Trump is, who does he listen to? And do the people that are whispering in his ear or laying these papers down here, do they actually understand? You got a guy like Peter Navarro, he's a guy they brought back from the first Trump administration. He doesn't seem to understand economics. He's not an economist, but he's become a self-styled economist, and just he's an expert because he says he's an expert. Well, he's not an expert, and he, very much like Trump, simply makes things up to try to validate his views. He even makes up experts, basically fictitious characters, to say, yeah, well, so and so said this. There is no such thing as so and so. Yet this is the way he goes on, and this is the way that Trump gets his quote-unquote information. It's a rather precarious circumstance right now, and it's very difficult, I think, for Prime Minister Carney or anybody else who's going to be involved in negotiations, especially economic negotiations with the United States, to understand that their premise is all based on fiction, really, when it comes down to it. Now, not everybody in the States knows that. Everybody in the States, I think, has a much more firm grasp of what's going on and the interrelationship that's going on, but others simply fall for the rhetoric that comes from Trump. One of the best examples, I guess, right now is the auto industry. Trump basically says he wants to have every vehicle made in the United States. The folks at the United Auto Workers down there, and you saw some of them, of course, during some of Trump's announcements, they're out there beating the drum, and they got the MAGA hats going on, and they figure, yeah, those Canadians are ripping us off. No, they're not. Countries that trade with the United States and have trade relationships and economic relationships are not ripping off the states. That's what negotiations are for. It's give and take. And the auto industry is a classic example of that, going all the way back to the Auto Pact and, of course, the free trade agreements that have been struck subsequent to that. It's an interrelationship. Parts go back and forth. It was a win-win situation. And it's not going to change overnight. But, if you're dim-witted like the president is, and you simply follow the rhetoric that he is spewing on a daily basis, you don't get the true picture. And I don't know how our U.S. negotiations with not just the Trump White House, but others, are actually going to be beneficial. I don't know how they struck trade deals in the past when you know that what they're trying to defend, basically, is totally untrue. It's a challenging position. And it's full of hypocrisy, too. I mean, we know that. Even Trump himself, who's, America first, it has to be made in America. He doesn't seem to want to mention the fact that all that crap that he sells, the MAGA hats and the T-shirts and the Bibles even, that's made in China. It's made offshore. A lot of the stuff that Trump puts out as MAGA stuff and as Trump stuff, memorabilia, is not made in America. So, it's the old idea of, listen to what I say, don't watch what I do. And people seem to say, okay, fine, we'll just turn a blind eye to that. It's frustrating as all hell up at this side of the border to understand that's the way things are being run down there. We understand that there are going to be some differences. That's why negotiations take place, to try to find some middle ground in situations. And everybody wants to be defensive and protectionist to a certain extent to make sure that their economy is not going to be unfairly punished because of some of the agreements that are made. We get that. That's what trade is for. That's what negotiations are for. But there's got to be a foundation of reality in these negotiations. And I'm concerned, and I know a lot of Canadians are concerned, about trying to get these negotiations going again when you've got the guy in the White House that's living in this fantasy world and so many other people around him that are simply enabling him and saying, yeah, whatever he says is the way things are. It's not the sort of solid foundation that you need to strike these agreements. And it's going to come to a boiling point. I mean, we already know that we're on the verge of recession. Some suggest we've already started a recession. And we've been down through this road a number of times in the last little while. And it ain't easy. It's tough on you. It's tough on me. It's tough on small businesses. And even more so, it's very tough to get out of. Once you go down that rabbit hole, it's very tough to pull yourself out again. And again, it's going to take knowledgeable people, insightful people at the political level to try to first of all, avoid that sort of thing. But if it's going to happen, to get us out of it. I, for one, and I think a lot of other people, not just on this side of the border, but even our American friends down there, don't have a whole lot of confidence that this guy in the White House even understands the situation, let alone has any concept as to how it's going to be resolved. Not a pretty picture. I get that. But we have to at least be the ones who are dealing in reality here. So we wish Prime Minister Carney all the best with his team. It's very capable people that can sit down at the table with the Americans and try to negotiate these deals. And it's very, very difficult to cut through the rhetoric that comes out of the White House. But somebody down there has to put up a stop sign and say, let's just do this. The whole thing with Trump that we have found in the past, and a number of people that have sat down at the table across from Trump's team, is you always have to create this idea that he's won. You know, that old thing that if you want somebody to come along with your idea, you got to make them think that it was their idea. And that way they get this sense of pride to say, yeah, see, I controlled the whole thing. It's a very tricky endeavor to try to do that, to try to get a deal that's going to be good for Canada and at the same time get Trump to understand, or at least to feel, that it was all his idea and that he's the one who's the big winner in this. I don't know how to do that. And I'm just hoping there are people wise enough to be able to understand that predicament and to work around it to try to get the best deal for Canada. We'll see. We'll certainly follow the discussions as they go forward. That's it for this edition of the podcast. Thanks so much for being with us. If you're new, welcome aboard. Good to have you with us. You can catch us on Substack, on Spotify, Apple, certainly on YouTube and on Blue Sky. Always look forward to your comments about the podcast that we put up there. Keep that dialogue going. Thanks as always to Madeline Kelly for the production of the show today. I'm Bill Kelly. Until next time, stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.